Let me say something that goes against everything modern culture teaches you. Confusion is not weakness. It is consciousness, trying to evolve. You have been told your whole life that clarity is the goal, that uncertainty means you are lost, that not knowing means you are failing. But I spent my entire life studying the human psyche, and I can tell you this with absolute certainty. The moments when you feel most confused are the moments when your soul is trying to break free from a version of yourself that no longer fits. Confusion is not the opposite of wisdom. It is the doorway to it. It is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is a sign that something profound is trying to become conscious. The question is not how to eliminate confusion, but how to stop running from it and start listening to what it is trying to reveal about who you are becoming. Before we start, if you genuinely enjoy these videos, consider subscribing to our channel and comment what city and time you're watching from. I am really curious where everyone is tuning in from. I want to share something with you today that took me decades to understand. Something that changed not only my work, but my entire relationship with my own inner life. Most people spend their energy trying to escape confusion, trying to find the quick answer, the clear path, the certainty that will finally put their mind at ease. But what if I told you that this very impulse, this desperate need for clarity, is what keeps you stuck in patterns that no longer serve you? What if the confusion you feel right now, that disorienting sense that you do not know who you are anymore, or what you want, or where you are going, what if that is not a problem to solve but a threshold to cross? You see, I have worked with hundreds of people over my lifetime, people from all walks of life, all ages, all backgrounds, and the ones who suffered most were not the ones facing the hardest external circumstances. They were the ones who refused to enter their own confusion. They were the ones who kept clinging to old identities, old beliefs, old ways of being, even when their soul was screaming for something new. They stayed in relationships that had died years ago because leaving felt too uncertain. They stayed in careers that drained them because starting over felt too confusing. They kept performing a version of themselves that everyone expected because discovering who they really were felt too disorienting. And here is what happens when you live that way. You think you are avoiding pain, but you are actually creating it. You think you are maintaining stability, but you are actually fostering stagnation. You think you are protecting yourself, but you are actually betraying the deepest part of who you are. Because your psyche, your soul, whatever you want to call that living intelligence within you, it will not let you stay small forever. It will create symptoms. It will create dreams that disturb you. It will create emotions that overwhelm you. It will create confusion that disorients you. Not to punish you, but to wake you up. This is what I devoted my life to understanding. How the psyche speaks to us through what we try to avoid. How the unconscious communicates through symbols, through dreams, through the very confusion we fear. And what I discovered is this. When you learn to work with confusion instead of against it, when you learn to see it as a messenger instead of an enemy, your entire life transforms. You stop needing all the answers. You stop forcing yourself into boxes that do not fit. You stop living according to scripts written by people who do not even know you. And you start living from a deeper place, a place of authenticity and wholeness that most people never access because they are too afraid to not know. So if you have been feeling confused lately, if you have been questioning everything, if you have been wondering who you even are anymore, I want you to know something. You are not broken. You are not lost. You are not failing. You are in the most sacred part of the journey, the part where the old self dies and the new self has not yet been born. This is what I call the process of individuation, and it is the most important work you will ever do. Not the work of becoming successful or impressive or perfect, but the work of becoming whole. The work of integrating all the parts of yourself you have been taught to reject. The work of discovering who you really are, beneath all the conditioning, all the expectations, all the roles you have been playing. And I am going to show you exactly how to do this. Not through abstract theory, but through real understanding you can apply to your life right now. We are going to explore why confusion appears, what it is actually trying to tell you, and how to work with it in a way that leads to genuine transformation. We are going to look at stories from my own life, from my patients, from ancient wisdom, traditions that understood this long before modern psychology existed, and then I am going to give you specific practices, simple things you can do daily, to turn confusion from something that paralyzes you into something that liberates you. Because here is what most people do not understand. The opposite of confusion is not clarity. It is rigidity. It is the false certainty that keeps you trapped in a limited version of yourself. Real wisdom, real growth, real transformation. It always begins in the dark, in the not knowing, in the confusion that strips away everything you thought you were so you can discover who you actually are. Now, let me take you into a story from my own life, because I do not speak about confusion from theory alone. I speak about it from lived experience. From a time when I myself descended into such profound disorientation that I thought I might never find my way back. It was 1913, and I was at the peak of my career. I had worked closely with Sigmund Freud. I had published important work. I had a reputation, a position. Everything the world tells you means you have made it. But inside, I was dying. I was living according to ideas that were not fully my own, fitting myself into frameworks that did not match what I was actually seeing in my work with patients, in my own dreams, in the depths of the human psyche that were revealing themselves to me. And I knew, with a certainty that terrified me, that I had to break away. I had to leave behind the security of established thought and venture into unknown territory. When I made that break, when I chose to follow my own inner truth instead of external validation, I entered what I later called my confrontation with the unconscious. For years, I was flooded with dreams, visions, images I could not understand. I did not know if I was going mad or going sane. I could not tell anyone what I was experiencing because I barely had words for it myself. Every morning I would wake up not knowing who I was, not knowing if what I was doing had any meaning at all. I was a respected psychiatrist experiencing the very symptoms my colleagues would have diagnosed as illness. But I made a choice. Instead of running from the confusion, instead of medicating it away, or dismissing it, or forcing myself back into the clarity I had lost, I decided to enter it fully. I started writing down every dream, every vision, every strange image that came to me. I started painting, even though I had never painted before, trying to give form to what was formless inside me. I started building things with my hands, working with stone, creating structures in my garden. Anything to help me stay connected to something real, while my inner world was dissolving. And slowly, over months and years, something extraordinary happened. The confusion began to reveal its meaning. The images started to form patterns. I began to see that what I was experiencing was not madness, but a journey, a descent into the deepest layers of the psyche that every human being carries but few ever consciously encounter. I was meeting what I would later call the archetypes, these universal patterns of human experience that live in what I termed the collective unconscious. I was facing my shadow, all the parts of myself I had rejected or denied. I was going through a death and rebirth, a psychological transformation that had been described in myths and spiritual traditions for thousands of years, but had been forgotten by modern rational culture. What emerged from that period of confusion was everything I am known for today. My understanding of the individuation process, my work with archetypes and symbols, my exploration of the relationship between psychology and spirituality, all of it came from my willingness to stay in the confusion instead of running from it. If I had chosen safety, if I had chosen the clarity of established ideas over the disorientation of my own experience, I would have lived a comfortable life, but I would have betrayed my soul. And more than that, I would have missed the very discoveries that have helped millions of people make sense of their own inner journeys. Let me tell you an old parable that captures this truth in a different way. There was once a man who lived at the edge of a great forest. Every day he would walk the same path through the trees, a path he had walked so many times he could do it with his eyes closed. He knew every turn, every landmark, every stone. This path gave him great comfort because he never felt lost. But one day, he noticed that the path had become so worn, so familiar, that he was not really seeing the forest anymore. He was just repeating the same walk, day after day, without any sense of discovery or aliveness. So, he decided to leave the path. He stepped into the dense forest where there was no trail, no markers, nothing familiar. Immediately, he felt terrified. He did not know where he was going. Every direction looked the same. He could not tell if he was moving forward or in circles. He felt completely confused and disoriented. Part of him wanted to run back to the familiar path, to the safety of what he knew, but something in him whispered to keep going. So he walked deeper into the confusion of the unmarked forest. He stumbled over roots he could not see. He got scratched by branches. He had moments of panic where he thought he would never find his way out. But he also started to notice things he had never seen before. Flowers growing in hidden clearings. Birds he had never heard. Streams running in directions he had not known existed. The forest was alive in ways he had never experienced when he was walking the same dead path over and over. And then, after what felt like an eternity, he emerged from the forest in a place he had never been before. It was not where he started. It was somewhere entirely new, and when he looked back at where he had come from, he realized something profound. The confusion, the disorientation, the terrifying sense of not knowing. That was not the problem. That was the journey itself. That was what it felt like to actually be alive, to actually be discovering, to actually be moving into new territory instead of just repeating old patterns. The familiar path was death disguised as safety. The confusing forest was life disguised as danger. I saw this same pattern play out hundreds of times in my work with patients. Let me tell you about one woman who came to see me. She was in her early 40s. Successful by every external measure. But she came to me because she said she felt like she was disappearing. She could not explain it better than that. She just felt like the person she had been was dissolving, and she had no idea who she was becoming. She told me she had spent her whole life being what everyone needed her to be: the perfect daughter, the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect professional. She had never questioned it. She had just done it. But now, her children were grown. Her marriage felt hollow. Her work felt meaningless. And she woke up every day in a fog of confusion. She did not know what she wanted, what she believed, what brought her joy. Everything felt uncertain. The old version of me, trained in conventional thinking, might have tried to help her regain clarity, to find a new role, a new purpose, something to anchor to. But I had learned by then that confusion like hers was not a problem to fix. It was a chrysalis. Her old self was dissolving because it needed to. She had lived for 4 decades according to other people's needs and expectations, and her psyche was finally saying enough. The confusion was her soul's way of creating space for something authentic to emerge. So instead of helping her escape the confusion, I helped her enter it more fully. We explored her dreams, which were full of images of houses falling apart, of walking through fog, of being in dark forests, all symbols of the dissolution she was experiencing. We looked at the parts of herself she had never developed, the interests she had never pursued, the emotions she had never allowed herself to feel. We examined what I call the shadow, all the aspects of her personality that did not fit the perfect image she had been maintaining. It was not a quick process. For months, she sat in that confusion, not knowing who she was, feeling untethered from everything that had once defined her. But gradually, something new began to emerge. She started painting again, something she had loved as a young woman, but had given up because it was not practical. She started saying no to obligations that drained her and yes to things that genuinely interested her, even if she could not explain why. She started having conversations where she said what she actually thought instead of what she thought people wanted to hear. And the most remarkable thing happened. The confusion did not disappear, but its quality changed. It stopped feeling like drowning and started feeling like exploring. She stopped needing to know who she was becoming and started enjoying the process of discovering it. She told me in one of our last sessions that she finally felt like she was living her own life instead of performing in someone else's story. This is what I want you to understand. Her confusion was not a symptom of something wrong. It was the necessary breaking apart of a false self, so a true self could emerge. If she had medicated it away, if she had rushed to find new clarity, if she had forced herself back into another role, she would have missed the most important transformation of her life. The alchemists understood this better than most modern people do. They talked about their work in symbolic language that sounds strange to contemporary ears, but they were describing the same psychological process. They spoke of the nigredo, the blackening, the stage where everything dissolves into chaos and confusion. They knew this was not failure. It was the necessary first phase of transformation. You cannot create gold without first breaking down the base material into its essential elements. You cannot become whole without first falling apart. But here is the part almost nobody tells you. The reason we resist confusion so intensely is not because it is actually dangerous. It is because we have been taught to identify ourselves with our personas, with the masks we wear in the world, with the roles we play. And confusion threatens those masks. It says you are not who you think you are. You are something far more complex and mysterious. For most people, that feels like death. And in a way, it is death. It is the death of the limited self so the larger self can be born. Now, let us go even deeper into what confusion actually is and what it is trying to teach you. Because once you understand the mechanics of it, once you see how the psyche actually works, you can stop being afraid of it and start working with it consciously. The first thing you need to understand is this: your psyche is always trying to move toward wholeness, not happiness, not success, not comfort, but wholeness. It wants to integrate all the parts of you that have been split off, denied, rejected, or never developed. This is what I call the individuation process, and it is the central task of the second half of life, though it can begin at any age when the soul is ready. You see, when you are young, you necessarily develop a persona, a functional self that can navigate the world. You learn what is acceptable and what is not. You develop skills, you adopt beliefs, you create an identity. This is natural and necessary. But the problem is that in creating this persona, you inevitably leave parts of yourself behind. The parts that do not fit, the parts that were criticized, the parts that seemed impractical or dangerous or shameful. You push them into what I call the shadow, the unconscious realm, where all the rejected contents of your personality live. For a while, this works fine. You function, you achieve, You maintain relationships. You feel like you know who you are, but the psyche will not let you stay divided forever. At some point, usually in midlife, but sometimes earlier, it starts demanding integration. It starts pushing the shadow material into consciousness. It starts questioning the beliefs you never examined. It starts showing you through dreams and symptoms and strange impulses that you are not who you thought you were, that there is more to you than the narrow identity you have been living from. And this feels like confusion, because suddenly, the clear story you had about yourself stops making sense. Suddenly, you are feeling things you did not think you were supposed to feel. Suddenly, you are questioning things you thought were certain. Suddenly, the path that seemed so obvious no longer calls to you. This is not breakdown, even though it feels like it. This is breakthrough. This is your psyche trying to expand beyond the limited container you have been living in. Here is the second principle. Confusion is the space between two different levels of consciousness. It is what you experience when the old way of seeing is no longer adequate, but the new way has not yet crystallized. Think about it. When you were a child learning to read, there was a period where the letters on the page were just confusing symbols. They did not make sense. You could not decode them. That confusion was not failure. It was the transition between not reading and reading. If you had given up in that confusion, if you had said this is too hard, I will just never read, you would have missed the skill entirely. It is the same with psychological development. When you are growing into a new level of understanding, a new way of being, there is always a period of confusion where the old framework has dissolved, but the new one has not yet formed. Most people panic in this space. They try to rush back to the old clarity, or they grasp at any new belief system that promises certainty, or they numb themselves so they do not have to feel the discomfort. But the ones who transform, the ones who actually grow, they learn to tolerate the confusion. They learn to sit in the not knowing long enough for something genuinely new to emerge. The third principle, and this is crucial, is that confusion often comes when you are trying to answer a question using the wrong level of consciousness. Let me give you an example. Someone comes to me and says, I am so confused about whether I should stay in this marriage or leave. And they want me to help them get clarity so they can make the right decision. But here is what I learned. The confusion is not about the decision. The confusion is a signal that the question itself is incomplete. The real question is not should I stay or should I go. The real question is, who am I becoming, and does this relationship support or hinder that becoming? The real question is, what parts of myself have I been rejecting in order to maintain this relationship, and am I willing to keep rejecting them? The real question is, what is my soul actually calling for, and do I have the courage to follow it even if it disrupts everything? You see, confusion at the level of practical decisions is usually a symptom of confusion at the level of identity and purpose. And you cannot resolve identity confusion by making a decision. You have to go deeper. You have to ask the bigger questions. You have to face the parts of yourself you have been avoiding. And that requires time, patience, and the willingness to not know while the deeper truth reveals itself. This brings me to the fourth principle. The psyche speaks in symbols, not in literal language. When you are confused, your unconscious is often trying to communicate something to you, but it speaks in the language of images, emotions, dreams, and symptoms, not in clear rational statements. If you only listen with your rational mind, you will miss the message entirely. I remember a man who came to me, tormented by a recurring dream. In the dream, he was standing in front of his childhood home, but the door was locked, and he could not get in. He kept having this dream over and over, and it left him feeling deeply confused and unsettled every time he woke up. He wanted me to make sense of it rationally, to give him a clear interpretation so the confusion would end. But I asked him instead to sit with the image. What did the house represent to him? What did it feel like to be locked out? What was he longing for when he tried to open that door? As we explored it, he began to realize that the house was a symbol of his own emotional life, the inner world he had shut himself off from when he entered adulthood and became focused solely on achievement and success. The dream was not about a literal house. It was about being locked out of his own depths, his own capacity for feeling and meaning and connection to something larger than himself. Once he understood this, the confusion transformed. The dream stopped being a disturbing mystery and became a guide, showing him what he needed to reclaim. He started doing inner work, exploring his emotions, reconnecting with creative pursuits he had abandoned, spending time in nature, all things that helped him unlock that door symbolically. The confusion had been the psyche's way of getting his attention, of saying you are living on the surface and there is a whole inner world you have abandoned. This is how the unconscious works. It will create confusion. It will create symptoms. It will create dreams that disturb you, not to torture you, but to wake you up. And if you learn to work with symbols, if you learn to ask what is this trying to show me instead of what is wrong with me, you unlock a source of wisdom that the rational mind alone cannot access. The fifth principle is that confusion is often a sign that you are carrying opposites that need to be held together, not chosen between. Modern culture teaches you to think in binaries. You are either this or that, either strong or weak, either rational or emotional, either spiritual or practical. But the psyche does not work that way. The psyche is paradoxical. It holds contradictions, and when you are confused, it is often because you are trying to force yourself to choose between two things that both contain truth. Should I be independent or connected? Should I be ambitious or content? Should I honor my individual path or my responsibilities to others? These are not either-or questions. They are both, and tensions that you have to learn to hold. This is what I call the transcendent function. The psyche's ability to hold opposites in tension until a third way emerges that includes both. But you cannot force this. You cannot think your way to the synthesis. You have to sit in the discomfort of the contradiction. You have to feel the pull of both sides. You have to resist the temptation to collapse into one pole or the other. And if you can do that, if you can tolerate the confusion of not choosing, something new eventually emerges that you could not have imagined from either position alone. I saw this constantly in my work. People who were torn between security and freedom, between duty and desire, between who they had been and who they wanted to become. The ones who suffered most were the ones who tried to eliminate one side of the equation. The ones who transformed were the ones who learned to hold both until a larger perspective revealed itself. The sixth principle is that collective confusion often mirrors personal confusion. You are not living in a vacuum. You are part of a culture, a society, a collective unconscious that we all share. And right now, in this moment in history, the collective is deeply confused. Old structures are breaking down. Old certainties are being questioned. Old ways of living are no longer working. The confusion you feel personally is connected to the confusion the whole culture is experiencing. This is actually important to recognize because it means you are not alone in this. You are not uniquely broken. You are part of a larger process of transformation that is happening whether we want it to or not. The old world is dying, and the new one has not yet been born, and we are all living in that confusing in-between space. But here is what that means for you. You can either resist it, clinging desperately to what used to be, or you can participate in it consciously. You can ask yourself, what wants to die in me that I keep trying to preserve? What wants to be born in me that I keep trying to suppress? How can I be part of creating something new instead of just mourning what is lost? This shifts you from victim of confusion to participant in evolution. The seventh and final principle I want to share with you is this. Confusion is the initiation into a deeper relationship with the self. And by self, I do not mean your ego, your conscious personality. I mean that deeper center of your being. That organizing intelligence within you that is wiser than your conscious mind. That knows things your ego does not know. That is guiding you toward wholeness even when you cannot see the path. Most people live their entire lives identified with the ego, thinking they are only the conscious self, the thinker, the doer, the person they know themselves to be. But you are so much more than that. There is a vast unconscious dimension to your being, and at its center is what I call the self, the archetype of wholeness. And the journey of individuation is really the journey of the ego learning to serve the self instead of the other way around. Confusion is what happens when the ego can no longer maintain control. When it has to admit it does not have all the answers. When it has to surrender to something larger. And that terrifies the ego because it feels like annihilation. But it is actually liberation. It is the beginning of living from a deeper source, being guided by something wiser than your limited conscious understanding. When you are in confusion, you are being asked to trust that there is an intelligence within you that knows the way even when you do not. You are being asked to stop trying to figure everything out with your rational mind and start listening to your dreams, your intuitions, your body, your emotions, all the ways the self speaks to you. You are being asked to have faith, not in some external God or doctrine, but in the inherent wisdom of your own psyche. This is where everything changes. Because once you develop a relationship with the self, once you start trusting that your confusion is not random chaos but meaningful process, you stop living in fear. You stop needing to control everything. You stop demanding that life makes sense on your timeline. You start being able to say, I do not know what this means yet, but I trust that it has meaning. I do not know where this is leading, but I trust that I am being led. I do not know who I am becoming, but I trust the becoming. Now let me show you how to actually work with confusion in your daily life. Because understanding the theory is valuable, but what you really need are practices. Simple things you can do that help you move through confusion instead of being paralyzed by it. The first practice is to create a container for the confusion. What I mean by this is, you need a regular practice of giving the confusion space and attention, instead of just trying to think your way out of it. This is what I did during my own confrontation with the unconscious. Every morning, I would sit down and write, not trying to make sense of things, just letting whatever was inside me come out onto the page. I would draw images, even though I was not an artist. I would record my dreams in detail. You can do the same thing. Set aside time each day, even just 15 or 20 minutes, to be with your confusion without trying to solve it. Write in a journal, not trying to be coherent or insightful, just letting your thoughts and feelings flow. Draw or paint, giving visual form to what you are experiencing. Move your body. Dance. Do yoga. Anything that helps you get out of your head and into your felt experience. The key is to make this a regular practice. A sacred time where confusion is welcome instead of something to be avoided. What this does is it gives your unconscious permission to communicate. When you stop constantly demanding clarity and instead create space for not knowing, symbolic material starts to emerge. You start having dreams that show you things. You start noticing synchronicities, meaningful coincidences that point you in certain directions. You start getting intuitions that you would have missed if you were only in your rational mind. The confusion stops being a wall and starts being a doorway. The second practice is to work with your dreams. This is one of the most powerful tools you have for navigating confusion. Because dreams are the direct language of the unconscious. Every night, while you sleep, Your psyche is processing everything you are experiencing, and it is showing you, in symbolic form, what you need to see. Start keeping a dream journal by your bed. The moment you wake up, before you do anything else, write down whatever you remember from your dreams. Do not worry if it does not make sense. Just capture the images, the feelings, the story. Then, instead of trying to interpret them rationally, sit with them. Ask yourself, what is the emotional tone of this dream? What symbols appear? What parts of myself are represented? How does this mirror something in my waking life? Let me give you a simple way to work with a dream. Pick one image from the dream that feels particularly charged or confusing. Close your eyes and imagine yourself back in that image. If it is a house, walk through it in your imagination. If it is a person, have a conversation with them. If it is an animal, ask it what it represents. This technique, which I called active imagination, allows you to dialogue with the unconscious, to let the symbol reveal its meaning to you, instead of imposing an interpretation on it. I have seen people resolve years of confusion through working with one powerful dream image. The unconscious knows what you need to see. It is just waiting for you to pay attention. The third practice is to identify and dialogue with your shadow. Remember, the shadow is all the parts of yourself you have rejected, denied, or never developed. And much of your confusion comes from the shadow trying to emerge into consciousness. So instead of fighting it, turn toward it. Here is how you do this. Think about the qualities in other people that really bother you, that trigger you, that you judge harshly. Write them down. Arrogant, selfish, weak, emotional, aggressive, whatever comes up. Now here is the difficult part. Consider the possibility that you are reacting so strongly because these qualities exist in you, in your shadow, but you have never allowed yourself to acknowledge them. This does not mean you are a terrible person. It means you are a complete person. You contain arrogance and humility, selfishness and generosity, strength and vulnerability, all of it. But you have been taught to only identify with certain qualities and reject others. Those rejected qualities do not disappear. They go into the shadow, and they create confusion when they try to come back. So once you have identified a shadow quality, try this. Write a letter from that part of yourself. If you identified arrogance in your shadow, write from your arrogant self. Let it speak. What does it want? What wisdom does it have? What would be different in your life if you allowed a little bit of healthy arrogance, healthy self-assertion, instead of always being humble and accommodating? This practice is uncomfortable, but it is transformative. When you integrate shadow material, you stop projecting it onto others. You stop being controlled by it unconsciously, and you access energy and qualities that you have been wasting by repressing them. The fourth practice is to identify the questions you are asking and see if you need to ask bigger ones. I mentioned earlier that confusion often comes from trying to answer a question at the wrong level. So, when you are confused about a decision or a situation, write down the question you are asking. Then, ask yourself, is there a deeper question underneath this one? For example, if you are asking, should I quit my job? The deeper question might be, what does meaningful work look like for me at this stage of my life? If you are asking, why do I feel so empty? The deeper question might be, what parts of myself have I abandoned in order to be acceptable to others? If you are asking, how do I fix this relationship? The deeper question might be, who do I need to become in order to have the kind of relationship I truly want? Bigger questions do not necessarily give you immediate answers, but they orient you toward growth instead of just problem solving. They shift your focus from what should I do to who am I becoming. And that is where real transformation happens. The fifth practice is to find what I call a symbolic act. This is something you do in the external world that represents the internal work you are doing. It helps make the invisible visible. It helps your unconscious see that you are taking the process seriously. During my own crisis, I built a stone tower with my own hands. It was hard physical work, and I could not have explained rationally why I was doing it. But I knew I needed to. It was a symbolic act of creating something solid while my inner world was dissolving. It gave me something tangible to hold on to while I was in the confusion. You do not need to build a tower, but you can find your own symbolic act. If you are in a period of letting go, you might create a ritual of burning old journals or letters that represent the past. If you are in a period of becoming, you might plant a garden, nurturing something as it grows. If you are trying to integrate shadow material, you might take up a creative practice that lets you express parts of yourself you have never shown anyone. The key is that it should feel meaningful to you, even if you cannot explain why. It should be something that your rational mind might dismiss, but your soul recognizes as important. These acts create a bridge between the conscious and unconscious. They help you embody the transformation instead of just thinking about it. The sixth practice is to find a witness. Confusion is harder to bear alone. You need at least one person who can sit with you in the not knowing without trying to fix you or give you answers. This might be a therapist, a trusted friend, a spiritual director, someone who understands that what you are going through is not a problem, but a process. I played this role for many of my patients, and I can tell you that sometimes the most powerful thing I did was simply to be present with their confusion without needing to make it go away. Just having someone say, "I see you, I hear you. What you are experiencing makes sense even though it feels chaotic." That can give you the courage to keep going when you want to give up. If you do not have someone like this in your life, seek them out. Join a group of people doing inner work. Find a therapist who understands depth psychology. Create relationships where vulnerability and uncertainty are met with compassion instead of judgment. You are not meant to do this alone. The seventh practice is to develop a relationship with what is larger than you. I do not mean you need to adopt a particular religion or belief system. I mean you need to connect with something that reminds you that you are part of something bigger than your individual confusion. This might be nature, art, music, contemplative practice, service to others, whatever helps you feel connected to a larger order. I spent a lot of time by the lake near my home, especially during periods of confusion. There was something about being in nature, seeing the cycles of seasons, watching the water move, that helped me remember that growth is not linear, that dissolution and reformation are natural processes, that I did not need to have all the answers right now because I was part of something that moved at its own pace. Find your own way of touching this larger reality. Walk in wild places. Sit in silence. Create beauty. Help someone who is suffering. Read poetry or philosophy that points to the mystery of existence. These practices shift you out of the small self that is confused and connect you to the larger self that is held by something beyond understanding. These 7 practices are not about eliminating confusion. They are about changing your relationship with it, learning to work with it as a sacred process instead of fighting it as an enemy. And when you do this, when you create containers for the confusion, when you listen to your dreams, when you integrate your shadow, when you ask bigger questions, when you engage in symbolic acts, when you find witnesses, and when you connect to what is larger, you are doing the work of individuation. You are becoming whole. Let me bring this to a close by giving you the one thing I most want you to remember. You are not here to live a life of constant clarity and certainty. You are here to become who you truly are, and that requires periods of confusion where the old self dissolves so the new self can emerge. This is not comfortable. It is not convenient. It does not fit neatly into our culture's demand for productivity and certainty. But it is real. It is the most real thing you will ever do. When you find yourself in confusion, when you do not know who you are, or where you are going, or what anything means, do not panic. Do not run. Do not numb yourself, or force false clarity. Stop, breathe, and say to yourself, something in me is trying to evolve. Something in me is ready to let go of what no longer serves and open to what wants to come. I do not need to know the whole path. I just need to take the next step. I do not need to have all the answers. I just need to be willing to live the questions. I do not need to be certain. I just need to be real. This is the path of individuation. This is the path to wholeness, and it is the most courageous, most meaningful thing you can do with your life. Not to achieve, not to perform, not to maintain the persona the world expects, but to become the fullest expression of who you actually are. Confusion is not your enemy on this path. It is your guide. It is showing you where you are still clinging to something that does not fit, where you are still living from fear instead of truth, where you are still small when you could be vast. So trust it, enter it, let it do its work, and on the other side, you will find not the answers you thought you needed, but something far more valuable. You will find yourself, the real you, the whole you, the you that was always there, waiting beneath all the confusion, all the conditioning, all the false certainty, and that is worth every moment of not knowing. If this resonated with you, make sure to subscribe for more, hit like to support, and drop a comment sharing your own experience with confusion. I would love to hear from you. Tell me what city and time you are tuning in from, and if you feel comfortable, share one thing you are currently confused about. You might find that just naming it begins to change your relationship with it. Thank you for being here. Thank you for doing this work. The world needs people who are willing to become whole. And that journey always begins in the dark, in the confusion, in the sacred not knowing. I will see you in the next video.